All right, now, fam, I'm trying to make it plain for you guys today that the Most High has spoken. Matter of fact, Shalom, welcome to Wake Up Israel News, Chris Shooter. I didn't do a video on this right away, but London Bridge is falling down, as you can see. It may not be London, but it's Europe. The church of the Friends burning down, and it's so prophetic to the T of what's going on with these people and their synagogues of Satan that's coming down to the ground. Look at the Vatican right here. Okay. Yeah. Look at the Vatican. The Most High has spoken. The end is here. The Vatican is the next synagogues of Satan that will crumble. Right? It's coming down, whether the people like it or not, you know. These synagogues of Satan is not of the Most High. That's is his enemy. People say Christians, this and Christian. There's always Christians church burning, but when those black churches burnt in Louisiana, in that same parish in Louisiana, if you know about Louisiana, a parish, meaning county. And matter of fact, the parish that those three black churches was burned down, right, was named after a guy from France, because Louisiana was owned by the French, right? The Frenchie, whatever you want to call them. The same guy that's named after that parish in Louisiana that those three black churches burned down has statues in that church that was burned down. That's burning down right now. I think, you probably can smell the smoke from Chicago or Atlanta. And even if the terrorists, like, let's say that the guy who did this, a person who did this was the same type of people that took down the Twin Towers. Well, the Most High used these evil beings to do his work, to get rid of their own people and their own structures and idols to crumble down, period. You know what I'm saying? He makes nothing is done without his permission and without his doing. You know what I'm saying? This is all the Most High, regardless if a terrorist done it or not. That building was burning so much and was so prophetic what happened. And let's take a look at the video. Okay, think about it. Those three churches in Louisiana that burned down in the same parish, right, raised $600 and some thousand. Okay. They looking to raise 1.8 million. They all raising money together, right? All black churches, right? The church in France that burnt down, they already had raised, three rich families came up with $700 million of raise, right? In France, already $700 million to pay for this stuff. Now, you notice how they always say black churches, black Christian church or black church. And when there's a white church involved, they say Christian church, right? They tell you all the time, we do not share the same God. Every time. I know myself personally, I do not share the same God than these damn devils at all. Period. Let's take a look at the video. You guys still with me, man? You guys still with me? Let's take a look at the video. Make sure you're with me now. Let's go.
World to take part in that mass.
And look at it.
I had mentioned here as we're on the air, we have Good Friday and Easter approaching. And so
pause. Let's pause this. Watch this symbol right here. Watch this symbol right here. That's the cross now. Come on.
Americans and people there in Paris were likely planning to observe the holiday from the pews in that historic church. I want to bring in Alistair Bruce from Sky News, a colleague.
This church take over like 4 city blocks. This is a huge church, man.
Of ours, a respected colleague and a longtime journalist for Sky News. And Alistair, this is just just unfortunate and saddening all over the world image that we're watching play out here at Notre Dame Cathedral.
It's absolutely devastating. I used to go when I was much younger to play the organ in that cathedral and know what an important icon it is for the people of Paris and of France. And it really has been at the center of French history, going right back to the 12th century and the 11th century when it was built. And we saw that spire, or the flesh, collapse earlier on, and the original one had been put up in the 13th and 14th centuries, and there was a new one put up in the 18th century. And what's so tragic about what it means to Roman Catholics living in France is that this is in the very heart of the ancient capital city, on this tiny island where the kings of France used to live. And up in that spire, in the little cathedral that used to mark the direction of the wind, used to be kept a tiny piece of the true cross and a little bit of St. Denis and St. Genevieve, who are the two patron saints of Paris. So this is a hugely important place for Catholics, for the history of France, and it has been at the center of the story of the Parisian people almost since the Frankish people first established a great monarchy and a great center of power and influence in that part of the world.
Alistair, you spoke of playing the organ as a boy at Notre Dame. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's been able to say that before. And obviously there is concern at this hour about whether or not anything inside that cathedral will be saved. We've now been watching these flames for well more than an hour and a half here, but certainly you must be concerned as you look at these images about what, if anything, will be saved.
What I find fascinating is that there was a reservoir of water kept between the two main towers in order to deal with a fire should it occur. Now, for some reason, there has not been a possibility to deploy that, or we will find out later on. But I know from the cathedrals that I still visit, and I adore visiting these old buildings, most of them put up centuries ago. They're full, originally, of tinderbox dry wood, which is around the strength of which the great...
We're just going to look at this video for a few minutes, fam, all right? For a few minutes.
Stone ceilings are built. And you can imagine that on top of that, you've got lead, which is the most resilient metal to create a roof. But once the
look at that church.
Fire gets into those old timbers and then is further heated by the sheer strength of the heat in burning lead, it is incredibly difficult for anybody to manage that fire. And I would imagine that this is the greatest tragedy to the arts of France that we are witnessing now, and it will take almost 100 years to put it right.
You describe perfectly the architecture and how old it is, the lead that surrounds the wood, but once you get to the wood, how quickly it ignites and how likely little hope there is at this point, other than protecting people in the vicinity and other structures in the vicinity of Notre Dame Cathedral. But much of this fire is going to be, certainly, it would seem, allowed to do its destructive work, at least when it comes to the spire, which we've already seen collapse, the top of the cathedral now on fire. You were listening to the description from Alistair Bruce, a colleague of ours at Sky News overseas, who once as a boy used to travel to Notre Dame to play the cathedral. We do have a tweet, it's in French, from President Emmanuel Macron, and the translation reads at this hour, "Our Lady of Paris in flames, emotion of a whole nation. Thought for all Catholics and for all French, our thoughts with them, like all of our countrymen. I'm sad tonight to see this part of us burn." That from President Emmanuel Macron, who we know was set to address the nation of France tonight in a taped speech that had been prepared beforehand. He was set to describe how he would react to the protests that we have been reporting on here in recent weeks in France about the economic divide in that country that appears to be growing. But certainly tonight, that's not what sort of consumes this country.
They are talking about with the yellow vest people. But let's read this. Let's go. Before we go here, before I continue this, that cross is going to crumble while this video is playing. But let's read a little bit. Let's go. What is this, man? The Catholic Church played major role in slavery. Okay? All right. My bad, fam. I'm just thinking about some stuff. Let's go. Let's read this, fam. Hold on. The National Newspaper Publishers Association has launched a global news feature series for history. Okay, whatever. By Stacey M. Brown. Okay. Are you guys still there? All right. When the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible, right? They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. Washington, D.C., September 4th, 2018. This is like last year. The Catholic Church played a vital role in the transatlantic slave trade, according to the historians and several published theses on the topic, whatever. The transatlantic slave trade was introduced by coming of the Europeans who came with the Bible in the same manner that Arab raiders and traders from the Middle East and North Africa introduced Islam through the trans-Sahara slave trade, which was worse than the transatlantic slave trade. According to the AfricaW.com, a premier informational website available throughout the continent. In fact, the church was backbone of the church was the backbone of slave trade, the authors wrote. In other words, most of the slave traders and slave ship captains were very good Christians, so-called Christians. For example, Sir John Hawkins, the first slave ship captain to bring African slaves to America, was a religious man who insisted that his crew serve God daily and love one another. That what they say? Huh? We share the same God. Why do when you tell them the Messiah was black, when you tell him that the Creator was a black man, the God Himself, it doesn't matter, right? Oh, okay, but it mattered when you hunt Negroes, huh? Damn devils. His ship, ironically called the good ship Jesus, left the shores of his native England for Africa in October 1562. Some historians argued that if churches had used their power, the Atlantic slave trade might have never occurred. But they didn't, because they serve the synagogues of Satan. Their God is the devil. Period. That's their God. You see it every day when these damn cops shoot unarmed black men, women, and kids in the streets and go home and drink coffee and watch reruns of Andy Griffith like it ain't nothing. By the same logic, others argued that the Catholic Church and the Catholic missionaries could have also helped to prevent the colonization and brutality of colonialism in Africa. However, according to a 2015 Global Black History Report, the Catholic Church did not oppose the institution of slavery until the practice have already became infamous in most parts of the world. In most cases, the churches and church leaders did not condemn slavery until the 17th century. Damn devils. The 5 major countries that dominated slavery and the slave trade in the New World were either Catholic or still retained strong Catholic influence, including Spain, Portugal, France, and England, and the Netherlands. Now, Portugal and Spain enslaved the Hebrews and made them commit to Christianity. And once they didn't do it, once they wanted to keep the laws, statute, commands of the Most High, what happened was they took their children back to West Africa from Spain, Portugal, and made them Christians. Okay, persons who considered themselves to be Christians play a major role in upholding and justifying the enslavement of Africans, said Dr. Jonathan Chisholm, an assistant professor of history at the University of Houston downtown. Many European Christian slavers perceived the Africans they encountered as as irreligious and uncivilized persons. They justified slavery by rationalizing that they were Christianizing and civilizing their African captors. So I guess they were like animals. We got to tame them to be, human. So we gonna give them a god. They were driven by missionary motives and impulse. The same missionary people that go to Haiti and do devilish shit in Haiti and Africa are the same people, the same bloodline today. That missionary white cave woman that went over there and tried to kidnap them black babies from Haiti? The same people. No different. Further, many Anglo-Christians divided slavery using the Bible. For example, white Christian apologists for slavery argued that the curse of Ham in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 22-25 provided a biblical rationale for the enslavements of blacks, Chisholm said. You still there? All right. In this passage, Noah cursed Canaan and his descendants arguing that Ham would be the lowest of slaves among his brothers because he saw the negatives of his father. They can't even, okay. A further understanding of the passage also revealed that while some have attempted to justify their prejudice by claiming that God cursed the black race, no such curse is recorded in the Bible. I guess that's why you're dying of skin cancer, your low birth rate, and your church is burning down, and all your major synagogues is burning down anyway. You're dying from heat waves called Lucifer, and God don't give a damn about you. That off-cited verse says nothing whatsoever about skin color. Also, it should be noted that black race evidently descended from a brother of Canaan named Cush. Canaan's descendants were evidently light-skinned, not black. Truly nothing in... Okay, here we go. The Messiah called these Europeans, the Romans, out when he said that you are the descendant, you are the Canaanites. You are the seed of the devil. You come from the land of Canaan, the Canaanites. And you just read right here. Also, it should be noted that the black race evidently descended from a brother of Canaan named Cush. Now, Canaan's descendants were evidently light-skinned, not black. Truly nothing in the biblical account identifies Ham, the descendants of Canaan, with Africans. Yet Christians apologists determined that Africans were the descendants of Ham. We are the descendants of Shem, not those skin cancerous Europeans over there. Synagogues of Satan. They come from the Caucasus Mountains. They're still walking on all fours in some of those regions. Yeah, I did a video on that too. Nevertheless, at the beginning of the 16th century, the racial interpretation of Noah's curse became commonplace, he said. In 2016, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. offered a public apology after acknowledging that 188 years prior, Jesuit priests sold 272 Jesuit priests, one of those Catholic Church devils, sold 272 slaves to save the school from financial ruin. This is how the New York Times first reported the story. The human cargo was loaded on ships at a bustling wharf in the nation's capital, disdained for plantations of the Deep South. Some slaves pleaded for rosaries as they were rounded up like pigs and animals, praying for deliverance. But on that day in the fall of 1838, no one was spared. Not the 2-month-old baby, not even a 2-month-old baby and her mother, not the field hands, not the shoemaker, and not the Cornelius Hawkins, who was about 13 years old when he was forced on board. Their panic and desperation would be mostly forgotten for more than a century. But this war was no ordinary slave sale. The enslaved African Americans had belonged to the nation's most prominent Jesuit priests. The Jesuit priest is the priest that come out the Catholic Church. The same Catholic Church in the big old Christian church over there in France is burning down to the damn ground. They all in the same game. Same thing. They all have sex with these damn children, with each other, and they were sold along with scores of others to help secure the future of the premier Catholic institution of higher learning at the time known today as Georgetown University. Damn, all these people. We surrounded by devils over here with these names. The Society of Jesus, who helped to establish Georgetown University, Caesar Borgia, Mona Lisa Jesus, and whose leaders enslaved and mercilessly sold your ancestors, stands before you to say that we have greatly sinned. Reverend Timothy Kiziki, SG, president of the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States, said during a liturgy of remembrance of contritions and hope. I'll butcher a damn word. What the hell with it? We pray with you today because we have greatly sinned and because we are proudly sorry. It ain't gonna help the Most High for putting the foot up your ass, so you can keep your damn apologies. During the early republic, Catholics celebrate the new constitution of its guarantee of religious liberty, while simply accepting its guarantee of slaveholding, according to Blackton.com. Okay. Internal church politics matter too. When the Jesuit order was suppressed in 1773, the plantation systems of the order in Maryland was seen as protection for their identity and solidarity. The University Church taught that slavery involved the sanction of scriptures and natural law. They thought it was natural to put. That's why they shoot us down, slave killers, man. That's why you hang black people in trees and point to them like it's a game to y'all, devils. Throughout the antebellum period, many churches in the South committed to sharing their version of the Christian faith with blacks. They believed that their version of Christianity will help them be good slaves and not challenge the slave system, Chisholm said. Oh, it helped you be a good old house nigga, boy. Okay. Yet it is important to note that African Americans made Christianity their own, and black Christians such as Nat Turner employed Christians' thought and biblical text to resist the slave system. Furthermore, black and white anthropologists, Christians play a major role in overturning the system of slavery. All right, fam. I'm going to play the video. Let me see. Is there any more left? Okay, that's about it, man. Let's do something. Let's go back to the video. Are y'all still there? Hope you got some out of that what we just read. So let's continue this video.
Country and really the world looking at France right now. That's a tight shot. You can see the people there on the balcony. You can likely see it at home even closer than I can see here in the studio. But we are joined now by Ann Lester. She's a medieval historian. And Ann, I'm not sure if you're able to see images of this to watch along with us, but just the sheer scope of watching such an iconic, 12th century cathedral go up in flames.
Yeah, I've been looking from my office, streaming online, and it's absolutely devastating, as you say. I think for anyone who's visited, who's been there, who's studied it, like I have and my colleagues have, this is shocking and deeply saddening.
And can you talk to us a little bit about, we have been lucky enough to travel to France to see the Notre Dame Cathedral, the Seine right below it, but this is a somewhat confined area in that beautiful and historic part of that stunning city, and likely was quite difficult for firefighters to get to the scene and quickly. When we see fires, obviously here in America, we see teams arrive so quickly, but we were watching these images and it seemed to be quite some time before we saw emergency vehicles on the scene.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Notre Dame is on the Ile de la Cité, and so the only way on to the island is across bridges. And, I know that the firefighters in Paris train there. They train for these, in fear of these events occurring, and are fully prepared, but it is no easy task, absolutely. It was designed to be both well fortified and safe, as well as a kind of jewel at the center of what was a royal city from the time really of Paris's very origins, but certainly from the medieval period onward. Yeah.
Yeah, you describe it as a jewel, perfect word. And, Notre Dame is the most visited destination in Paris. 13 million people visit the cathedral every year. 35,000 a day go to pray at the cathedral. And of course, as we've been mentioning with our live coverage here.
But who they praying to, fam? Huh? The devil himself.
Just a stunning sight. The Cathedral of Notre Dame up in flames at this hour in Paris. That Good Friday is approaching, Easter Sunday approaching. And I want to get back to John Dickus, the American who is a visiting professor in Paris and who witnessed that spire collapse. And John, as you've been listening to this discussion here, the concern over how quickly emergency teams were able to get there to try to save. We can see now the hoses and some of the spray on that fire, but it certainly just seems to be overwhelming the authorities there on the ground.
Yeah, there's no question. I'll tell you that for me, the most heartbreaking moment was when I saw about 20 minutes after I started watching the fire, I saw the ladders go up and the hoses start spraying, and it was just heartbreaking to watch. The ladders were not tall enough. The hoses were not strong enough. This was just clearly a fire beyond the capacity of the crew's capabilities. I mean, they were clearly doing everything they could, and it was just so much bigger and so much more out of control than they had the resources to deal with. And it's just devastating to watch.
Describe for us again the moment we saw the spire, perhaps one of the most iconic parts of that cathedral. Really defined the look of that cathedral for so many people who come to visit it. The stained glass windows, but of course that spire that we have watched tumble. What that was like for you, John?
There's no question that was the most horrifying moment. My partner and I were standing on the balcony watching. That was the moment that she started crying when we watched that spire fall down. It's just, it's such an iconic part of the Paris skyline. It's such a symbol of worship for so many people, and to see it come down like that. We both moved to Paris from DC, so of course this took us back to 9/11. I mean, that was sort of a natural association for us. I certainly hope that no one has been killed at Notre Dame, but I mean, in terms of just the confusion and the sense of shock that people are feeling, it's awful to see. And the streets in front of my house right now are just choked with people. The emergency trucks seem to be having a hard time getting through. People are just sort of paralyzed and transfixed watching this beautiful, iconic building collapsing in front of them.
I want to get back to a point you made there, John. We can hear the emergency vehicles behind you. You're listening to John Dickus, a professor in Paris. He's an American who's lived there for about 2 years now. He's witnessing this fire, been watching it, along with much of Paris. He's described the crowds in the streets. What else can you see as far as the scope of the actual fire? Of course, we're watching in live pictures, not only on French television, but from a number of places around Paris. People are on social media carrying this live, but just give us the scope of how you watch this grow right before your eyes.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. I was actually sitting at my dining room table working. I was preparing a lecture for my class tomorrow, and I noticed that on the bridge in front of my house, a whole crowd of people had stopped on the bridge, looking over the river, and they were all facing west, and you sometimes see that happen when there's a beautiful sunset or something like that, but it was several hours before dark, so I couldn't figure out what was happening. So I walked out on my balcony to see what could be drawing the crowd's attention, and I saw that a fire had at that point just started. It had started right under the spire of the cathedral, and it took a minute to realize how devastating this was going to be. At first, the fire looked scary, but the building is so huge, it was hard to get a sense of how big the fire was when it was just under the spire before it had spread. And so everyone was sort of hopeful at first that this would be something that the emergency crews might be able to control, or something that could be brought in line. Certainly, my partner started texting me as she was on her way home from work, and I was talking about watching the ladders go up and the hoses start spraying, and they couldn't even reach the fire at first. I mean, for half an hour, it looked like they weren't able to get any water on it from my vantage point. And you started to see the flames crawling up the spire, and you started to see sections of the roof coming down, and it's just it's wrenching to see one of the most beautiful buildings in the world just collapsing in front of you like this.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking, and we're looking at live pictures. You're watching ABC News live coverage of this devastating fire that is playing out in France at the Notre Dame Cathedral now, 2:22 Eastern. That makes it about 20 after 8 in Paris. You can see the clouds of smoke. You can certainly be seen all across that city. But for those who are close, particularly like John Dickus, who we've been talking to during our live coverage, this has been quite devastating to witness firsthand. The people in the streets of Paris looking up at this destructive fire, and we've watched the spire collapse in this live coverage, and just to see the scope of the flames as they shoot up through that structure, it would look to be destroyed, certainly the top of the cathedral. But this cathedral has a storied history about surviving not only conflict but destruction before, during the French Revolution, and obviously during World War II. The liberation of Paris, 1944, the cathedral suffered damage then as well. Stray bullets, snipers on the roof, but this is going to be an enormous challenge for this cathedral to survive the scope of this. As you look at this vantage point and the smoke there, I'm just taking in the pictures along with all of you at home. There are so many people who are carrying this, on their smartphones, these pictures live, and it's sort of a reflection of the times that we're in. But with each new vantage point comes the realization.
You got that right, Jack. The times that we're living in, because the Most High is about to begin and finish the devil off once and for all. Now, I don't know if I should keep playing this video, but I think you get the point. Part of Notre Dame Cathedral spire collapses as massive fire. So you saw the spire, that cross came tumbling down, right? That symbol, the symbol right here, that little cross right there, this little white boy got in his hand with his overcoat. That's the Vatican. But see, this is the Vatican. This is not France. But they're all in the same family. They're all in the same gang. They all worship the same God. See. I just want to share this. It's tumbling down. I don't know if you guys want to continue watching this stuff, but we are living in a biblical time. The Most High is very, very pissed off.
Much of the top of this cathedral, at least, has been destroyed. The race is on, Terry, to see how much of it can be saved. And we were talking with Alistair Bruce, as you know, Terry from Sky News, who described as a boy being able to go to Notre Dame Cathedral to play the organ. But we have discussed here how difficult it is for firefighters and crews to get there. And you can see the one hose in the bottom right of your screen. But he and so many of the other observers have said they're outnumbered by the scope of this fire.
It is really the threat to all these beautiful old cathedrals. Fire, so many of them were destroyed. I've been to Utrecht in the Netherlands, and a magnificent old cathedral, St. Martin's, brought down by fire over the years. And as you said, over the centuries, Notre Dame has survived for so long, but it has seen a lot of damage as well. The French Revolution, when the revolutionary leaders wanted it desecrated and vandalized, and they did a tremendous amount of damage. There was talk of it being torn down at that time, and it was Napoleon who really led the way to restore it. He was crowned there. And then during the World War II, when the liberation of Paris happened, Allied troops coming, and there was gunfire and fighting around Paris, Charles de Gaulle, the great hero of France, the free French leader, as soon as he got to Paris, he went straight to Notre Dame. He knew, leader that he was, charismatic leader that he was, that was the heart of France. And as he got out of the car, machine gun fire erupted. There was a battle there, almost making it an even more sacred place in the French national imagination. But as others have said, this is one of the most sacred sites of Christianity. It's an old and magnificent church, and it has seen so much. Joan of Arc is associated with it as well. This means so much to the people of France. to Catholics and Christians around the world. And really, this is one of the triumphs of European civilization that we're watching go up in flames. It was a bold statement when it was built those 800 years ago. Imagine the most modern building you can. That's what Notre Dame looked like to the people of the time. Those soaring, flying buttresses, the roof so high that we now see coming down, took people's breath away. It seemed like a miracle. And it was all done to the glory of God and to the glory of France, no doubt. And now it will have to survive this as well. It has survived so much over the centuries. It will survive. But as Alistair pointed out, it's going to take a long, long time.
Terry, as you said there a moment ago, it took their breath away in the 12th century. And the images all of these centuries later taking our breath away right now. And as you mentioned, it will survive in some shape or form, but it's just at this moment devastating to see. That spire, that was the moment before it collapsed, fully engulfed in flames there. We do know that there was a major renovation project underway, a $7 million renovation on the church's spire, and it's 250 tons of lead inside the spire. Max Miafidis joined us now. He's an eyewitness, and he's there in Paris. And Max, can you describe what you've witnessed as much of the world now prays for Paris?
For sure. So what actually happened, you first of all have to know that the roof of the cathedral was actually took on fire. So we arrived at the beginning, and what happened is that the whole roof of the cathedral was actually burning. And a few minutes ago, you probably seen it from like the videos and the image that you've seen on the social media. Actually, the arrow with the cross, the religious cross, actually fell down. So right now, it's just kind of a chaotic situation. Like there is the police like everywhere around. Everything is buckled off. Like you cannot go anywhere. We're actually closing a bar right now, and everything is being shut down. So yeah, this is pretty much chaotic, and it's around 600 years of history that are burning down right now.
600 years of history, as you say. You also described the entire roof in flames. You know, it certainly looks devastating from the images that we're seeing, but it's hard to get a real scope of how much of the cathedral is actually on fire right now, Max.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, half of the cathedral is on fire. What you have to know is, like, because everything is in wood, the fire is spreading very, very rapidly. So we had some firefighters that were brought up by trucks and everything, and they're trying to like put it down and slow the fire and make it, you know, just extinguish. But what's happening is that because there is wind today, it's actually not happening at all. So yeah, I would say that a good half of the cathedral is probably coming on fire, and because the main structure is in wood, it's probably going to spread even more. So it's not looking very good right now, but we'll see.
And Max, just give us an idea. We've been seeing images here of people, and I'm not sure that they're workers who were part of that construction project renovating that spire, but there are, for every once in a while in these live pictures, you see workers on balconies, it would appear surrounding the cathedral. I don't know from your vantage point if you can see those people, and certainly the hope at this point is that no one has been injured, but it would seem those workers are very close to these flames.
Yeah, so you're right. Actually, there were people working on the cathedral at that time, and it's probably what set on the fire, because we have no information right now about, like the police don't want to tell us or anything about how it started, but we are pretty sure they came from here. But these people should be safe at the moment I'm speaking, because we arrived right at the beginning, and there were actually no one on these shelves and everything. So it was pretty clear. I'm entirely sure, 90% sure that everyone is safe, but like the damage are just gonna be way more moral than probably physical at this point.
We're seeing pictures. Max, thank you very much. That was extraordinarily helpful, and we're sorry for what you're witnessing up close and what the world is now watching. We're seeing pictures come in right now on French television of President Macron. He appears to be in this moment being briefed by authorities as he approaches the fire and is being brought up to date on this just devastating blaze, now not only consuming certainly the top part of that iconic cathedral in Paris, but consuming us all over the world in our horror and disbelief that such an iconic structure in Paris is now going up in flames. As he now arrives at the scene, we do know that he tweeted earlier, and as we mentioned, one of the ways that they talk about Notre Dame is as Our Lady, and he tweeted out, "Our Lady is burning tonight." Of course, they're 6 hours ahead in Paris, which would make it about 8:30 p.m. in Paris. President Trump has also tweeted saying, "So horrible to watch the massive fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris." He added in his tweet, "Perhaps flying water tankers could be used to put it out. Must act quickly." The president certainly reacting to some of the questions we had early on, which was just how quickly could they get, emergency relief firefighters to the scene. As you look in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, I'm really struck by some of these images. Every once in a while, you'll see sort of one hose from one particular direction. And this one in particular, taking aim at those flames, but it would certainly seem that they are vastly outnumbered in strength and in power, the sheer force of this fire. And in talking to Alistair Bruce earlier from Sky News, as a boy going to the cathedral himself and describing the architecture, the structure, the lead surrounding that ancient wood that keeps so much of that cathedral in its glorious form, is also now being preyed upon by the heat and the strength of these flames as that wood, that part of the church now goes up in flames. Again, there is certainly a guessing game at this hour as to what could have caused this. We do know there was a $7 million renovation project, the scaffolding surrounding this fire on the top of that cathedral. And our foreign correspondent, James Longman, is watching this unfold along with us. And James, you have reported on the political turmoil in Paris these last few weeks on World News Tonight for us. And certainly this is going to be just one more chapter of heartbreak for the people of France. It's been an unsettling time in that country, and this is going to really hit everyone.
Yeah, absolutely, David. They've been going through the Gilets jaunes protest, the Yellow Jacket protest movement about living standards and the rising cost of living there. Macron, as you say, President Macron has come under increasing pressure to address those issues. But time and time again, when we've been to France to report on whether it's those sorts of protests or terrorist attacks, unfortunately, over the last few years, France has been a target there. The French have this capacity to unite when things go wrong, and this is certainly a night to unite. I mean, watching this, we've all been saying it, is absolutely terrifying. We are not very far here in London from our cousins over in France, and it's very sad for us to be watching what's going on. But the French do have this capacity to find strength in the darkness, and they're going to need it here. This is absolutely, it's a terrifying thing to watch. And as you keep saying, this one hose of water keeps going for that, the center of the fire there, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And something we're watching as emergency services appear at the scene, some of their cranes don't seem to be able to go high enough to tackle the blaze. So certainly there's still a lot of work to go as we watch now France, the dusk is approaching now over Notre Dame. And we know now that Emmanuel Macron, we're hearing now on French news, the French president and the Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, they are both on the scene being briefed by their officials, hoping, praying that this can be brought under control soon.
James Longman watching from our London bureau, and James, who has reported extensively on the protests in recent weeks in France that have not let up. In fact, President Macron, who is now on the scene being briefed by authorities, was set to address the nation tonight in a televised speech, one that had been recorded earlier, about the social unrest in his country that so far is not letting up. Instead, he's now facing another, certainly far more urgent crisis in Paris, and that is the fire engulfing much of the Notre Dame Cathedral. He did tweet a short time ago, "Our Lady of Paris in flames, emotion of a whole nation." He added thoughts for Catholics, and as we have mentioned here, and it bears repeating, it's Good Friday approaching, followed by Easter, and so many make that voyage to Paris and to the Cathedral at Notre Dame to pray during these holy days. And the president there adding, like all our countrymen, I'm sad tonight to see this part of us burn. John Dickus is a professor in Paris. He is an American citizen, but he's been living there for 2 years. And John, there are descriptions coming in to me now about people on the bridges over the Seine simply in awe and shock and watching this as dust falls over the cathedral as it continues to burn there in Paris. John Dickus, if you're still with us, we're getting descriptions coming in now. In fact, one quote just handed to me now from the Notre Dame spokesman André Finot, telling French media, quote, "Everything is burning, nothing will remain from the frame." The 12th century cathedral, obviously home to incalculable works of art, one of the most famous tourist attractions in the world. And obviously, as we've been on the air now for the better part of 40 minutes or so, there is hope, certainly on our end, and prayers in Paris that something will be salvageable from the cathedral in Notre Dame. Some of those, jewels on the inside, the art, the stained glass. But from your vantage point, how much of that do you think will even be possible?
I gotta say, when this fire first started about an hour and a half ago, I was hopeful that they'd be able to get it under control. And from my balcony, I would say it's devastating right now. We just saw another portion of the roof collapse. We can see they've got a second hose that's hitting the flames now, but it's just the hose and the water stream is so small compared to the size of the fire, even as the fire has started to burn itself down a little bit. The one thing we're still holding out hope for is the two towers, the big towers at the front of the cathedral. The entire time we've been watching, we haven't seen any flames coming out of the towers. We haven't seen any flames coming up the towers. So we're still holding out hope that those towers are going to stay standing when this is done.
No, and John, I was struck by what you said there a moment ago, saying we now see a second hose, and just the mere idea that you can see from your vantage point only two hoses now at work trying to take down this massive fire that's engulfed the roof, and certainly much more of the Notre Dame Cathedral at this point. The roof in the beginning as we started monitoring this, and now we've watched the flames overtake much of that cathedral. We know that Parisians are in the streets, they're along the Seine, they are watching, aghast and in horror, as this fire engulfs one of the most famous cathedrals in the world, and certainly the most famous in Paris. The spokesman for the Notre Dame Cathedral telling French media at this hour that the entire wooden frame of the cathedral, they suspect, will likely come down, that it's not just the spire we saw some time ago, but that the entire wooden structure they're predicting will come down. They are certainly concerned about people in the area. There were reports from witnesses that embers burning from the church carried in the sky over the streets of Paris, that some of those were falling on people below, and that emergency teams were moving them back. But again, at this hour, the entire wooden frame of the cathedral at Notre Dame in flames. They fear it will all come down. And the quote I mentioned a moment ago is quite something. The spokesperson for Notre Dame Cathedral saying everything is burning, nothing will remain from the frame. Of course, the cause of this catastrophic fire unknown at this hour. There is speculation. When the fire first broke out, you could really clearly see the scaffolding surrounding that spire. And for those of us who have been lucky enough to have traveled to Paris, you're familiar with that scaffolding. There you see much of it there. This $7 million renovation project for that ancient spire on the top of the cathedral. There is speculation that perhaps the fire was potentially linked to that renovation, though we do not know that for sure. They were renovating the spire. It's 250 tons of lead in that spire. Paris police say so far there are no reported injuries or deaths. We were watching some pictures of those workers at different locations at the cathedral, on balconies, it would appear. And let's just hope that everyone has gotten to safety as this has played out. Steve McGill joins us now. He's the Jersey City Fire Chief. And Steve, you're no stranger to trying to knock down massive fires, but this one brings with it extraordinary challenge because of the sheer nature, the history of this cathedral, and the isolated area. And for those who've been to Notre Dame, you know how difficult it is with the Seine just beside it. It's literally to walk to get there. And we have eyewitness reports that the streets are clogged not only with people, but making it difficult for emergency vehicles to get there.
Yeah, it's those type of structures are very difficult to get to. And yeah, due to the terrain, like you mentioned, water supply is going to be a big issue. And just getting the apparatus and equipment up there is a big issue. The major issue with these type of buildings, though, is the construction. They're what we call heavy timber, which is very large wooden structures and beams. And once they catch fire, they're very difficult to put out. It has a lot of potential for fire spread. those type of buildings, there's also large voids in the ceiling area where the fire gets into that. Very difficult to get to due to the height of the ceiling. And there's a lot of collapse hazard potentials in these type of buildings.
I mean, we're talking about a 12th century cathedral, and obviously it's been renovated many times over the course of several centuries here. But to try to retrofit something as historic and beautiful as Notre Dame with the kind of, firefighting, aids that we are familiar with here in the U.S. In this day and age, that's a pretty difficult feat to try to prepare Notre Dame Cathedral for a flame of this scope fire.
Yeah, and most churches aren't equipped for that type of things. Even if you wanted to try and put sprinkler systems into those buildings, it'd be very difficult to get it into the upper areas where there's a lot of these voids and hidden areas because of the height where they're at and just extreme fire load that's in those. This is old construction from hundreds of years ago where they didn't really worry about that type of stuff. You also have the masonry walls on the exteriors, and a lot of this timber work is holding up, or is being held up by those walls. And once that timber starts burning up, those walls are probably going to come down also.
Yeah, that masonry structure that you say that surrounds the wood, it almost insulates the fire for a time, making it difficult, I would imagine, for firefighters to get to it and get to it quickly. Chief McGill, I appreciate you watching along with us as well. Again, the deputy mayor of Paris says Notre Dame Cathedral at this hour has already suffered, quote, colossal damages. As we watch this play out live along with people all over the world, we know that hundreds of Parisians have lined the streets along the Seine and surrounding Notre Dame Cathedral, watching, certainly devastated as they watch this historic church come down. The deputy mayor of Paris saying they fear that much more of this church will come down. Emmanuel Gregoire saying first responders are now trying to salvage the art and other priceless pieces that are stored in parts of that cathedral, because so many of these cameras, and justifiably so, are pointed at the flames toward the top. It's hard to get a sense of that effort, but there are efforts on the ground to try to get some of the valuables and the historic pieces inside the church out of the cathedral. Even as this fire takes place, there's significant concern on the ground because of reports that pieces of that church being carried away. One eyewitness describing the winds in Paris this evening, helping to fuel not only the flames, but then to carry the embers over parts of Paris. A concern for people watching from below. We saw earlier that spire, that famous spire at the top of the cathedral come down. It was initially surrounded by flames, and then we were watched as this progressed on live television. There's the image right there, which is still breathtaking to see, and we've seen it several times now. But for a time, simply the flames were around the spire, and then you saw them shoot up right inside. And as we've heard so many people here eloquently describe the age and the historic nature of the lead and the wood, and the wood that was surrounded by much of the stone that builds the church, but now would serve as a bit of insulation as this fire takes over the top of the cathedral. And the main question now is how much of it can be saved, if any of it at all. We know that the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, is on the scene being briefed by authorities. He is trading one, national situation for another. He was set to address the French people about the growing divide, the socioeconomic debate within that country, the protests we've seen in the streets in recent months, so the fires that have been set in the streets, set to address the nation tonight, in fact, and instead that speech put on hold, canceled for this evening, instead dealing with something that will bring heartbreak to everybody in France, and certainly prayers from around the world, including here in the U.S. President Trump tweeting as well his thoughts for the people of France, and certainly watching along with the rest of the world as that cathedral known by so many people. Even if you haven't been to Paris, people know Notre Dame Cathedral, and certainly in these days ahead, such a holy moment in the year in the calendar, Roman Catholics from all over the world set to mark Easter. And as we know, there was Sunday Mass in the Cathedral of Notre Dame every Sunday in Paris, and likely Mass was set for Easter a week from this weekend, obviously Good Friday coming up this weekend. I mentioned that tweet from President Trump, who wrote "So horrible to watch, the massive fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris." He actually suggested water tankers or something from the air, and obviously we haven't seen any sort of aerial assault on this fire. We've only seen so far fire trucks from down below. There's the tweet from the president asking about whether or not water tankers could be used, must act quickly. He added to that tweet, and certainly they know on the ground there in Paris that they have to act and act rapidly. The question is whether or not they have that sort of capability in such a confined area in Paris. Chief McGill back with us now, and Chief, it must send, even for someone so experienced as yourself, shivers down the spine when you think about the age of this structure and what they're trying to preserve and really
all right,
the clock at this point.
Structures like that, these antiquities are very difficult to
second.
deal with. You want to be cognizant of the history behind them and try and save as much as you can while still trying to put the fire out. It's not an easy task to do. And as I'm watching it, water is going to be a big issue, trying to get water up there, especially to those heights. I saw the tweet from the president, but dropping water from a tanker, water is very heavy. And if it hits a structure like that out of a tanker, it could cause further collapse. And you're not going to be hitting the voids under the roof. Roofs are made to keep the water out, not let water in. So only the parts where the roof is burned away would you get in there. But there's so many hidden voids in these old type structures that it's very difficult to get to them.
And the sheer weight of the water, Chief, as you point out, might be almost as damaging as the fire itself. Describe for us, if you will, the challenges as we now head into the evening, as we're watching here in the States, live coverage here on ABC News of the massive and devastating fire at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. It's about 8:47 in Paris at this hour. Night.
Fam, all I gotta say is this: the Most High has spoken. The end is here. The Vatican is the next synagogue of Satan that will come crumbling down, and the next thing is going to be that Edomite, Esau, Jesus, Mona Lisa, Caesar Borgia in Brazil. That's going to be tumbling down as well. Everything has to go. This is a yard sale. This is a Roman sale. This is a spring sale. This is a last-minute in-store sale of America and Babylon, including Europe. And the whole world is Babylon. This is the end of the week sale for Babylon. Everything has to go, including the synagogue of Satan. On that note, this has been Wake Up Israel News with Chris Judah. See you next time. Shalom, fam. Love you guys.